Hi. Today we're going to talk about the moon, which I guess really isn't any different from any other day. But this time I learned something this week that was really exciting to me, and I just wanted to share it with you. So, this is always our destination, and in order to get there, we always talk about hardware business outreach and frameworks. So today we really are talking about two things, hardware and framework, okay? So hardware is probably my favorite topic of all the things that we do. It's the part about actually, the physical assets that exist on the moon eventually. But role of government really certainly plays a key foundational element to this effort, both current programs and potential programs. So what did I learn this week? Well, I read a news article about a Japanese company, iSpace, going to the moon soon. And I knew about them, but I hadn't really thought about them in the larger context. So I was racking my brain, okay, who else is going to the moon? And I could think of, iSpace, the one I mentioned, but then there's also Intuitive Machines and Astrobotic Technologies and Maston. Okay, so that's 4 missions, and I posted about that a couple days ago. But then I started thinking about, well, who really is going to the moon? And I didn't know. I didn't know the answers. So it turns out that European Space Agency actually did this work about a year ago. So this chart is about a year old, but it's pretty accurate as far as I can tell. I've dug into some of the pieces that I had easy access to, but I can't verify for everything on this doc. But it's the European Space Agency, so credit where it's due. I'm going to give them the benefit of the doubt. So what does this thing tell us, right? I started really digging into it, and the first thing that really popped out to me was just how many new entrants into the field there are, right? So that the only people who have landed on the moon are Americans. The Soviets built a robot first to go to the moon, and the Chinese have a robot up there currently, right? So there's only 3 nations that have successfully landed anything on the moon. India and Israel both attempted it last year but failed. They got really close, so credit where that's due. They failed within a few hundred kilometers of the lunar surface, so pretty amazing job there. But what really struck me with this diagram is just how many new entrants there were to the field. European Space Agency is certainly making a pretty strong effort. In India, Israel, the UK, lots of nations, both individually and collectively, are aiming for the moon. So that's the first takeaway, is there's a lot of people, a lot of different cultures going. The second takeaway is something I already knew, but I didn't have it in this kind of layout. Like, what kind of missions are going? If the end goal is civilization thriving, living, working, and playing on the lunar surface, then of course we're going to have some human missions, and there are 3 of those. And there are going to, of course, be precursor missions that are robotic and exploratory. So no real surprises there, but of course it makes me really happy that we're going to have human missions, that's a priority once again. And then the way that they broke this graphic out in the first place, you've got institutional, which in this case means national space agencies. And then they've got an entirely new section called commercial, which honestly, 10 years ago, this chart would have been entirely lopsided. They wouldn't have made this chart at all. There would have been no commercial elements at all to a chart like this. So that even exists, and that it takes up a pretty big chunk of this screen, is a pretty big deal. So institutional and commercial. So who are the participants? Lots of them, so that's really good, and they're interspersed mostly on the institutional side, but certainly some on the commercial side, which is really important. I'm particularly eager to see what happens with Japan here. This will be their first real effort, so I'm excited to see what they're able to accomplish. And then, you know, China is always talked about as the threat, as a near-peer competitor to the United States. What are they up to? And I certainly share some of those concerns. Although this chart actually made me feel quite a bit better than I had before. So it kind of is making me change my mind a little bit. That there are 3 missions is certainly significant, and hats off to the Chinese program for that. When our team went down to Colorado Springs about a year and a half ago, we met with Air Force Academy folks and Air Force Space Command folks, and the rover had just landed just a few days before. So that rover is still operational up there on the moon right now. It cycles off every lunar night. But you know, so we're watching this very carefully, and certainly there were questions to us about what we thought about the Chinese program. Then there's the Russian program. Now I have a lot of confidence that if Russia is working with the European Space Agency, that near-term mission is probably pretty likely. I have a lot of skepticism for the missions that are further down the curve, just because of the Russian economy and the price of oil these days. They keep pushing these other missions further and further back. So I have a little bit of skepticism there. And you'll notice between this one and this one, there are no commercial missions. So they haven't really taken that turn yet, and I think that's also an important distinction. So then what about this chart, right? The reason European Space Agency put this chart together in the first place is they have a pretty dedicated commitment to going back to the moon. The reason this chart exists, and I'll put it in the links below, is that this was a part of a larger study, and they're doing a solicitation for commercial communications platforms for the moon. So they want to highlight all the things that they're doing internally at European Space Agency. Now remember, this is the original chart, and we broke it down commercial versus institutional. So let's talk about the commercial side for a minute. If you ignore this particular line, then it looks like the institutional side is greater than the commercial side. But it's misleading. And I don't understand why ESA would get this detail so wrong, but this line means something very different. It means there's a lot more missions. There are a lot more commercial missions. So what would that look like if it was a completely visualized description of what's happening? And this is what it looks like. And now there's some assumptions to this, right? That the missions from SpaceX and Blue Origin are considered in the CLPS mission program, right? So each of those 2 years, there's 2 flights per year for about 7 years. All of a sudden, this commercial side looks quite a bit busier. And I want you to pay attention to this, because it took a second to kind of sink in. Each of these missions I described earlier, Astrobotic, Intuitive Machines, and Maston, each of these missions will have multiple commercial clients. Let's make up some numbers. Maybe they each have 5, maybe they have 10, maybe they have 25. That sounds unrealistic, but let's focus on 5 or 10. If all of these missions have 5 or 10 clients, suddenly you're talking about 100 companies operating on the moon. Maybe 200 companies operating on the moon. And most of these are going to be really, really small sensors. There are going to be communications arrays. There may be a few rovers out there doing some survey work. But this kind of flood of activity on the commercial sector is really, I'm very excited about it, but it also changes the conversation if you look at the graphic this way versus that way, right? They tell a different story. Okay, so what are we talking about? We're talking about 5 institutional missions led by NASA, but we're also talking about 16 commercial missions, 21 missions to the moon by the United States. That's a different story than even I knew, and I thought I was pretty aware of this stuff. So when you look at all these circles, the moon is about to become a very, very busy place. So we're going back, and America is going back to stay. So I think that's a pretty interesting way of looking at this data. I'd love to hear your comments and feedback. If I've got something wrong, please let me know, but this is my current interpretation. Thanks. Take care. Bye-bye.